Hi, I'm Dara Kotak.
And I'm Julia Schluger.
Welcome to exclusive coverage of Truman Capote's Black and White Ball.
In 1966, to celebrate the success of his new book, In Cold Blood, Truman Capote decided to host a party.
Because Truman Capote's book was so successful, he gained a celebrity-like status. Selling millions of copies of his book, Capote made lots of money and therefore had a high budget for his party.
Eventually deciding on a masquerade ball, Truman Capote began extensive planning for his event.
His guest of honor would be Katharine Graham, publisher of the Washington Post and Capote's friend. In the months leading up to the event, Capote's party was the media's center of attention.
Capote had to find the perfect venue for his event. He chose to host his event in the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The Plaza and other hotels in New York City were famous for their large ballrooms, and a competition between who could host the most social events and balls arose among the hotels. In June 1963, New York Times published an article titled "The Battle of the Ballrooms." In it was the evolution of how New York City's hotels turned from places that simply provided food and shelter into social citadels. The Plaza Hotel was a popular choice for many celebrities visiting New York City. In Capote's opinion, the Plaza Hotel had the only beautiful ballroom left in the United States. The Grand Ballroom was 83 feet long and 45 feet wide and had 25-foot ceilings. The ballroom was perfect for Capote's ball because of its elegant style, and for this reason, Capote felt that no lavish decorations for the ballroom were needed. Hotels and the ballrooms they contained became a home to the wealthiest and most socially prominent people in the city.
All of the 510 people on Capote's guest list were the who's who of notables. As author Ethan Mordden perfectly stated, Manhattan was America's beacon of sophistication. If you wanted to be sophisticated, you played by Manhattan's rules. And if you didn't, well, you couldn't end up on the guest list. Many registers, for example, the Social Register, contain the names and addresses of the most well-known and important people in America. The Celebrity Register had biographies of 2,240 contemporary celebrities. Women could become celebrities simply because of what they wore or whom they married. The International Best Dress List was another collection of names of those who were rich and of high status in society. Although many on Capote's own guest list were included in these famous registers, Capote invited authors, actors, businessmen, politicians, and some of his closest friends to the party. Capote was said to have made about 500 friends and 1,500 enemies. For anyone who was not invited to his party was not only embarrassed that he did not make the list, but upset that Capote had not invited him. Capote even made sure he knew who his single guests brought to his party because he didn't want unwanted guests attending. Once his guest list was complete, Capote made the invitation. He made numerous edits to the invite before sending them out. Capote shortened the address from "In the Grand Ballroom of the Hotel Plaza, New York, New York," to "Grand Ballroom, the Plaza," because he was confident that all of his guests knew exactly where the plaza was, for the hotel was so famous. The orange and yellow border was added to make the invitation more modern and contemporary, and when Capote was satisfied, he sent out his invitation to Tiffany's. When the invitation came back from Tiffany's, it had numerous mistakes. Capote did not have time to send back the invitations, so he handwrote the edits. He crossed out the RSVP address and rewrote the correct number, 465, and added, "In honor of Mrs. Katharine Graham," at the top of the invite. Capote also included a small card, and guests were to bring their card to the dance for admittance. Finally, Capote was ready to send out his invitations. An invitation to Capote's party quickly became the most wanted invitation at the time, for if you received it, you instantly reached the high status coveted by many individuals.
On the night of November 28th, crowds of photographers, journalists, and bystanders swarmed the plaza, all waiting to catch a glimpse of the arriving guests. A CBS camera crew stood outside the plaza and aired live coverage of the event. The men and women made their grand entrances into the hotel. Some women had their masks custom made by famous fashion designers, such as Adolfo, at places such as Bergdorf Goodman and Saks Fifth Avenue, high-end department stores on Fifth Avenue. Adolfo made about 125 masks for the women that night. The women, some dressed in conservative and elegant gowns, and others in flashy dresses, had spent hours preparing for the ball and made sure they were seen by the many photographers. None of the guests chose to enter through the plaza's secret security entry, because being seen meant that you were part of New York City's elite. Truman Capote, wearing a tuxedo and a 39-cent mask from FAO Schwartz, stood with Kay Graham at the entrance of the ballroom, greeting their guests. Guests mingled with one another, ate, and danced throughout the night. The menu for the ball consisted of 450 bottles of champagne, chicken hash, spaghetti and meatballs, and pastries and coffee. The final affair cost Capote around $16,000.
On the night of the party, there was a great contrast between the wealthy and orderly world of those inside the plaza and the political chaos outside. The war in Vietnam and the civil rights movement created an atmosphere of instability and turmoil in New York City. Secretary of State Robert McNamara declined his invitation to Capote's ball because he thought it was inappropriate to frug at Kay's party while the country was in the midst of such political unrest. Capote's ball came with lots of criticism from those in the city. When one uninvited woman who managed to intrude on the party got a chance to speak to Capote, she yelled, "Spending all this money when there are people all over the world starving to death." Pete Hamill, a columnist for the New York Post, wrote an article titled "The Plaza," which alternated between descriptions of the ball and news reports of battles and death in Vietnam. Soldiers even voiced their opinions about the ball. A private from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, wrote a letter to Time expressing the anger he had that such an expensive ball took place. If one were to look solely at the atmosphere of the plaza that night, he would be unaware of any political unrest in the city. The next day, newspapers around the country published numerous articles about the event. The irony of the situation was that headlines of the ball stood next to headlines of battles in Vietnam and civil rights demonstrations in the city. However, the ball survived all of the criticism it got and became the social event of the season. The plaza continued to house New York City's most renowned guests and host many events. However, none could compare to Truman Capote's black and white ball. Years after the event, many would still talk and write about that night. It was a cultural and sociological benchmark, and some even considered it the party of the century.